Over the last 20 years or so, the internet has gone from a novelty to a necessary part of everyday life. You seemingly can't function in society without some form of online access. To think that there are people out there without an internet connection is strange and outside the norm for us. But what if that is the case? What if the people you interact with on the internet aren't people at all? What if the internet died and you're interacting with digital ghosts? The internet of the early 2000s was the Wild West. New sites were popping up with new ways to view the world. Content and content delivery were being rethought out and fine-tuned. New voices were joining the established hierarchy and disrupting known quantities with a new era of thought. I make it sound very heady and pretentious, because it was in a lot of ways. The early internet changed the world profoundly. Wikipedia, YouTube, Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, LinkedIn, Amazon. Can you imagine a world without these? I mean, you can definitely imagine a world without MySpace since its usefulness concluded about 15 years ago. In general, though, most couldn't live without the internet. But a group of internet denizens has noticed something strange happening to online spaces. In the beginning of the internet, it was believed that you, a person, were behind your internet postings. Of course, there was a layer of anonymity, but at the core, it was understood that everything on the internet was created by another person, someone comparable to you. It was cold comfort knowing that the person insulting you on a message board was human, but it was comfort nonetheless. This group of internet conspiracy theorists posit that the internet as we know it actually died in 2016 or 2017. How does the internet die? To believe the theories, it dies when the majority of the content is no longer made by humans. It's believed that bots have finally crossed the threshold where they outnumber living beings on the internet. You could be reading content written by an AI. Your friends on social media could be bots. The person you just met on Tinder may not even exist. For all you know, I'm just a voice-to-speech software. We've known for a long time that it's possible for companies and even wealthy individuals to boost their social follower counts with bots, but those bots don't have to really do anything. They just follow and then sit. No one is checking them for activity. What happens when these bot accounts actually start posting? What if they can influence the way you think or the way you vote? Many proponents of the dead internet theory believe that that is exactly what is happening. With the rise of algorithms serving you content that you want to see, your online presence begins to exist in a bubble. They believe manufactured content creators that are actually deepfakes are selling you things you normally would never have wanted, but you've become so ensnared in a certain lifestyle due to the influencers you see in your personally tailored bubble that you can't help but be enamored by a product you would have never in a million years cared about. It's a lot to take in. It is true and observable that the internet has become a bit sterile. The same content posted over and over, garnering the same replies and even the same GIF reactions. It becomes so repetitious that you might actually start to believe that you are the only real person on the internet. But I'm here, I think. Lake Mead, stretching across Nevada and Arizona. At its maximum capacity, it is 112 miles long and 532 feet at its maximum depth. Formed after the construction of the Hoover Dam, it is the largest reservoir in the U.S. by volume. It provides life-giving water to what was a previously barren stretch of semi-desert in Arizona, California, and even some parts of Mexico. Almost 20 million people rely on the lake to live. Since 1983, a combination of factors such as drought and increased population have left Lake Mead at less than full capacity. Recently, the water levels have dropped low enough that things thought lost to the lake forever are being uncovered. Things like bodies. May 1st, 2022. A report comes in to the National Park Service at Lake Mead that there is a barrel on the shore containing what appears to be a dead body. Las Vegas police are notified and an investigation begins. The body in the barrel, by their estimates, appears to have been shot in the head and stuffed in the barrel sometime in the 1970s or 80s, based on the clothes the corpse was wearing. A body in a barrel is colloquially known as a mob signature. In 1946, when mobster Bugsy Siegel opened the Flamingo, it was a clear signal that the Eastern Seafront mob had moved into Las Vegas. Siegel himself was murdered in 1947 and the killer never found. But the success of the Flamingo would see mobsters flocking to this new and exciting jewel in the desert. The thing about the mobsters is they didn't want any bad press for Vegas, as it was where they made money from casinos and other enterprises. Open violence or mob brutality would drive away the tourists. No one dared to do a hit in city limits or anywhere nearby. Lake Mead was a convenient and very large place where once something or someone was dropped in, they weren't going to be seen again. Now, due to drought, the water level is receding, and some speculate that we're just seeing the beginning of the bodies which will be given up by the lake. May 7th, 2022. A tourist walking along the receding shoreline of the lake saw what they initially believed to be the skeleton of a bighorn sheep native to the area. Upon closer inspection, they discovered a human skull and jawbone. The National Park Service and Las Vegas police were once again notified. An investigation has begun, and the police are saying that preliminary findings don't show any signs of foul play. I bet you're wondering how a random skeleton, long lost to the waters of Lake Mead, could be anything other than a murder victim. Well, Lake Mead is deadly. In 2017, it was ranked as the deadliest national park in the country. According to studies done between 2006 and 2016, an average of 25 people die per year at Lake Mead. The top cause of death? Drowning, followed by vehicle accidents and then slips and falls. It is estimated that in the 10 years that the study from Outside magazine covered, over 1,000 deaths were recorded at Lake Mead. So every body found as the lake recedes won't hold the mystique of a forgotten mob hit. Some are just the unfortunate few who slipped under the surface and were never found. As I stated before, Lake Mead is huge. It has 759 miles of shoreline. Every day, people are walking the shores or boating or swimming. The 2 bodies found in the last week will not be the last. A former police officer, David Kohlmeyer, has offered a $5,000 reward for divers who are willing to go down into the lake and find more barrels. The Park Service has been quick to inform any aspiring barrel hunters that they actually can't do that. They are aware of hundreds of barrels at the bottom of Lake Mead, some dating back to the construction of the Hoover Dam in the 1930s. Most are just random trash. It would be dangerous and irresponsible for any diver to go looking for random barrels. At this rate, without some serious changes to the water conservation status of the lake, the barrels will reveal themselves in time anyway. I'll leave you today with a quote from Michael Green, history professor at the University of Nevada. Quote, "If the lake goes down much farther, it's very possible we're going to have some very interesting things surface." End quote. It may not seem like it to the average person, but space exploration is making leaps and bounds every day. From China's U-2 rover finding a house on the moon, to the first public UFO hearing in 50 years happening on May 17th, no matter how you look at it, space is getting more and more intriguing every day. Heck, I heard they even found a door on Mars. I know we're all still shook about the moon cube. The strange geological shape captured our imaginations at the beginning of the year, only to cruelly crush us when closer inspection revealed a big rock. It's okay though, because the Curiosity rover has come in clutch with a new mystery for us to speculate about.
The Curiosity rover is currently making its way up Mount Sharp, a 3-mile-high mountain. It's still in the foothills, called the Greenhue Pediment, which contains layers and layers of sediment formed when the planet was covered with water millions of years ago. In the photos taken of the area, a strange geological feature stands out. It appears to be a cleanly cut doorway in the side of an outcropping. Conspiracy theorists and alien fans were quick to point out an oft-repeated adage that says that nature doesn't form perfectly straight lines. "There are no straight lines or sharp corners in nature," is a quote attributed to Antoni Gaudi, an architect hailing from the 1920s. He was, of course, not a geologist, and was speaking in a more general sense about harsh angles in architectural planning. The full quote is actually, "There are no straight lines or sharp corners in nature. Therefore, buildings must have no straight lines or sharp corners." Take from that what you will, but it is not a hard and fast rule that nature doesn't make straight lines. In fact, there are many, many, many examples of straight lines in nature, but I digress. It doesn't help matters that Mars experienced its largest observed earthquake on May 4th, just 3 days before the discovery of the doorway. I might have called the seismological oddity an earthquake. Since it happened on Mars, it would actually be a Marsquake. The quake, coming in as a magnitude 5, is, as I said before, the largest quake ever recorded on another planet. In total, the various missions to Mars have recorded over 1,000 quakes. We've not been monitoring for too terribly long though, and this may be just a small shake compared to the seismic history of the planet. Nevertheless, its timing is slightly suspect in the minds of some. With essentially unfettered access to Mars and with our ways of observing it improving every day, we'll probably see a lot of firsts. Whether these will coincide with something as mysterious as a doorway appearing in solid rock, well, much like a glass coffin, remains to be seen. Professional skeptic Mick West has posted photos showing that the doorway is actually a very zoomed-in picture of a fracture in some rocks. The photos are from Mars, but he maintains they've been purposefully cropped to appear more mysterious and dynamic than they actually are. Some internet theorists don't believe that. They believe that the large outpouring against the Mars doorway theory is a well-oiled cover-up machine, shielding true believers from a potential bombshell discovery. The Quantock Hills in Somerset, England, is a beautiful place. They contain the strangely named Dead Woman's Ditch, an ancient earthwork, or artificially raised or lowered land. It's a popular spot for people to go on walks and enjoy the scenery. In February of 2022, though, these serene walks were interrupted by a loud and vulgar ghostly presence. There may be a ghost haunting Dead Woman's Ditch. People on relaxing walks have reported a woman in a white dress emerging from the thick trees on either side of the path, who yells at them to fuck off. This is a far cry from the moans and rattling chains we associate with hauntings. The first reported sighting of this foul-mouthed specter was actually back in 2020. Ghost hunters and married couple Christine and Dave Thomas reported being told to leave and fuck off during an investigation into the site in 2020. They had been there before, reporting similar encounters with the ghost of a murderer, allegedly from the late 1700s. People that live in the area have reported ghostly encounters with a woman in white, wearing an old-fashioned dress. Others have seen a person in a long coat who disappears when they go to take a closer look. So, why is Dead Woman's Ditch purportedly so haunted? Many point to the murder of Jane Walford in 1789. She was killed by her husband in the area. Some say that Dead Woman's Ditch itself is named after Walford, although maps of the area containing the name have been found predating her murder. Walford was definitely murdered on the site, and is a suspect in the search for the identity of the swearing ghoul. Another suspect is Shirley Banks, a 29-year-old textiles manager, who was abducted and later murdered by notorious serial rapist and murderer John Kanan. Banks's body was found in Dead Woman's Ditch in 1988, having been beaten to death with a rock. Kanan was caught and is currently serving out the rest of his life in HM Prison Full Sutton, York. Could this ghost be the wandering spirit of a woman tragically murdered? Some believe so. Others are not so sure. Some people believe that the area and its remoteness is the prime location for pranks. Some believe that a Bluetooth speaker placed off the path is the real culprit at work at Dead Woman's Ditch. As I said before though, reports of ghostly activity has been common in the area for quite some time. Some reports are from before the advent of Bluetooth speakers, but granted, the earliest sighting, reported by a young man driving home, didn't have any cursing involved. Others on social media are having a bit of fun with the sightings. The idea of a ghost clambering out of the bush to yell obscenities at passerbys is just too funny for them to pass up. Some were quoted by the Daily Mail as saying it all seems a bit Scooby-Doo, and even the ghosts are going chav. The investigation into the area continues. Whether the area is haunted by ghosts or just bored teens, Dead Woman's Ditch still remains a beautiful piece of country that many won't be deterred from exploring easily. Zenkolweni, South Africa. A village of roughly 3,000 people, it sits in the remote southeast of the country. It's a quiet place, far removed from the hustle and bustle of larger South African enclaves. For the last year, though, something has been creeping through the nights in Zenkolweni, preying on its most vulnerable citizens. The village is cast in a new light by this nocturnal hunter. Zenkolweni is now known as the Village of Death. Almost every month for the last year, beginning in May of 2021, someone has been killed in Zenkolweni. The victims are all women, all elderly, all home alone when night falls on the village. Violence is not unheard of in South Africa. Outside of active war zones, it is one of the deadliest places on Earth. Research has shown that someone is killed in South Africa every 20 minutes. Zenkolweni felt different. In its remoteness, it was spared the more intense violence of larger cities. That is, until the current unpleasantness. The killings have shown a level of brutality unfamiliar to the village. The women have been stabbed, throats slashed. Police have stated that the women have been bled, left to exsanguinate on the floors of their homes. Evidence is scarce and people are scared. When night falls on the village, sleep is harder and harder to come by. Many don't sleep at night anymore, choosing instead to stand guard in their homes, ready to face down whatever monster is stalking their unlit streets. The murders have occurred in the early parts of the month, and residents of the village believe that the killer must know the victims or have been watching them, since they know that the victims live alone. In response, many villagers have begun sleeping in the same house or sleeping in shifts. The sense of community has not left Zenkolweni. Police have remained silent in the wake of the killings, and this reluctance to discuss or update residents on the case has led to a rise of vigilantism. 7 suspects between the ages of 21 and 27 in the killings have been found extrajudiciously executed. Some were burned alive, others were hanged. None of their deaths brought an end to the monthly killings. 12 other men have been arrested and then released due to lack of evidence. Police have 6 thieves in custody, and their trials are set to begin this month, June of 2022. Some in the village believe that the thieves are the incorrect suspects. Searches of the homes of the murdered victims show no sign of theft. Cash has been left, along with other valuable items. This shows that the person committing the crime isn't there for financial gain. Under increased media scrutiny, Zenkowini's residents have closed ranks. When asked by news outlets about the murders, they refuse to acknowledge that they've even happened. Recently, this same increased scrutiny has caused the killings to mysteriously stop as soon as they mysteriously began. Some suspect that the media and police actively working on the case have taken the wind out of the sails of the killer, since they might be more easily caught. An investigator working on the case had a slightly different theory. Quote, "We sometimes see that serial murderers who begin to be uncovered move away. We might come across them again somewhere else." End quote. I would think it goes without saying that I see a lot of mysteries. Some solved, some unsolved, some so mysterious as to make me think they'll never get a satisfying conclusion one way or the other. In my research, I occasionally come across photos. These are usually photos of unexplained phenomena that generally don't have enough information attached to them to form a whole episode of Dread the Unsolved. This week, I wanted to give these mysterious photos a spotlight. Smaller mysteries are still mysteries, and these photos truly show that a picture can be worth 1,000 words. You may not know the name, but I'm sure you've seen the Stanley Hotel. Opened in 1909, it served as the inspiration for one of the most terrifying novels of all time, Stephen King's The Shining. While it didn't feature in the 1980 film, that honor belongs to the Timberline Lodge in Oregon. It did make its big screen debut in the lesser-known 1997 miniseries. Even though the Stanley Hotel doesn't have a history of violence and murder, it seems like after the release of The Shining, people began to notice more and more how haunted the Stanley was. Estes Park, Colorado, May 27th, 2021. Kim Kimberly was taking a tour of the Stanley Hotel. She states she was encouraged to take lots of photos. Out of the hundreds of photographs, something strange stood out in one taken at 9:03 p.m. The photo, taken of the third floor, appears to show a woman standing in the window. In a second photo, taken just moments later, the figure is gone. The Stanley Hotel has respectfully declined to comment on the mysterious photo, and others around the internet have been quick to cry Photoshop. No definitive answer for this photo exists. Las Cruces, New Mexico, August 2020. Someone had been stealing items from the grave of 2-year-old Fabiola Rodriguez. Distressed, her parents asked the cemetery to pay special attention to the comings and goings at the site. Another family, whose son was buried near Fabiola, offered to check their video footage of the area. They explained that their son had been murdered, and they believed his killer, still on the loose, had been vandalizing their son's grave. When the footage was presented to Fabiola's mother, something truly awe-inspiring was captured. A young girl, around the same age as Fabiola when she died, was seen at the grave inspecting the items left there by family. In the final moments of the video, she's seen in a photo walking away with a taller male figure. Both families believe this is Fabiola leading a murdered son to the afterlife. Could this be a photo of two young people denied justice moving on together to the next life? May 21st, 2022. Amarillo, Texas. A security camera outside of the Amarillo Zoo catches a strange visitor in the middle of the night. Just outside of the zoo's outer fencing, cameras caught a figure wandering around the outskirts of the zoo. The photo appears to show, in my opinion, some sort of bipedal creature. Others in the area have stated it's a chupacabra, with one resident guessing that maybe it's a man with a strange hat who likes to take late-night walks. The city of Amarillo isn't too concerned, and their head of Parks and Recreation has stated he wants people to have fun with it. The figure remained outside the zoo, and there was no sign it attempted to enter, and there was no damage around the property. For now, it's been classified as a UAO, or Unidentified Amarillo Object. I had surgery yesterday. I've made it 32 years on this earth without ever needing surgery, but I guess time comes for all of us at some point. As I was being wheeled into the operating theater, I was struck by thoughts of the mysteries of the human body. Realistically, outside of a severe issue, none of us will ever see the inside of our bodies. So as I lay here now in bed, convalescing, I wanted to tell you about a medical mystery that's still discussed in hushed tones by doctors and nurses all over the country. I want to talk to you about Gloria Ramirez, also known as the Toxic Woman. She's in full renal failure and cardiac arrest. This is the endgame of her stage 4 cervical cancer. Her home care nurse knows this and calls an ambulance as a last desperate life-saving measure. She arrives at Riverside Hospital and is seen to immediately. Triage begins and pure oxygen is pumped directly into her lungs, and a full suite of sedatives are employed. Initially, medical professionals in the room notice some odd symptoms. Ramirez is covered in what will later be described as an oily film, and others will observe that her breath has a fruity garlic smell. Registered nurse Suzanne Kane then begins a blood draw on Ramirez's arm, and all hell breaks loose. Upon removing the syringe, Kane remarks that it smells of ammonia. This is corroborated by 3 other medical professionals in the room with Ramirez. They also report strange manila-colored particles floating in the blood. As Kane moves across the room, she suddenly faints, falling to the ground. Another nurse goes down as well, followed by a third. At this time, the attending physician orders an evacuation of staff and patients in the ER. They all file out and regroup in the parking lot to remove their clothes, stuffing them in hazardous material bags. A team of medical professionals don hazmat gear and converge on Ramirez's room. Undeterred by the strange illness she seems to have inflicted on the staff, they begin their best efforts to save her life. After 45 minutes of CPR and defibrillator use, Gloria sadly passes away. Although Ramirez was dead, official cause of death was kidney failure brought on by cancer. There was still a lingering spirit of sorts in Riverside Hospital. All in all, 23 people were in some way affected by Ramirez. 5 would remain hospitalized for days following direct exposure to her. The symptoms were all the same: nausea, lightheadedness, shortness of breath, and muscle spasms. An investigation commenced. Initially, Ramirez's body was sequestered in a separate room, double wrapped in plastic body bags. Later, her body would be moved to an airtight metal container. Doctors Anna Marie Osorio and Kristen Waller were brought in to oversee the investigation into the strange illnesses connected to Ramirez. They would go on to interview over 30 people who had been in the hospital during Ramirez's final moments. Blood tests were conducted on those affected, which surprisingly came back completely normal. There seemed to be no lasting evidence of what had afflicted them. At the conclusion of the investigation, Osorio and Waller released their findings. They believed that the whole situation was a case of mass hysteria. After Nurse Kane fainted, they believed it caused a kind of domino effect in the others present. To see a career RN go out cold, they must have believed that it was something dangerous, and their minds did the rest of the heavy lifting. Those present don't buy that theory. The Riverside Coroner's Office sought out more answers and brought in Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory for a scientific analysis of the situation. Their findings constitute what most people familiar with the Ramirez case believe to be the cause of the unexplained illnesses. They came to the conclusion that Ramirez must have been using a substance named dimethyl sulfoxide as a pain reliever, also known as DMSO. DMSO is a commercial degreaser sold in auto parts stores. Had she been using DMSO, it would have reacted poorly to the life-saving measures taken in the hospital. DMSO would explain her garlicky breath and the oily film on her body. DMSO in the blood would have interacted poorly with the sedatives, essentially crystallizing her blood and breaking it down into dimethyl sulfate, a chemical which can cause the symptoms reported by the ER staff. This, of course, is just a theory, as no one was able to prove that Ramirez had been taking DMSO. Her family definitely didn't buy that theory, and after her body was released to them, they hired an independent pathologist to examine her body. Unfortunately, time was not on their side, and her body was badly decomposed and her organs had become contaminated with feces. Also, for some reason, her heart was missing completely. Some believe there was a cover-up of sorts at Riverside Hospital. The missing heart, the contaminated organs, and the original syringe Nurse Kane had used to draw the blood that would kick this whole thing off was missing, and would never be found. Officially, Ramirez's death remains as kidney failure. Her family doesn't believe this, and neither do many in the medical and scientific community. We will probably never fully know the circumstances surrounding that February trip to Riverside Hospital. Gloria Ramirez is buried in Riverside Olivewood Cemetery and, despite the rumors, is not buried in a lead coffin.
It has been an exciting year for celestial bodies. We've had a moon house that turned out to be a big rock. A door on Mars that, through creative cropping, initially appeared large enough to be hiding Martians, but actually ended up being only big enough to maybe hide a dog. And now, we've got something else mysterious happening outside of our atmosphere. June 27th, 2022. Astronomer Bill Gray is observing the cosmos when he notices something strange, an object headed for the moon. It appears to be a rocket body, a piece of man-made tech. Despite the moon being absolutely pockmarked with craters, there has never been a recorded unintentional strike on the moon by man-made space junk. Some rocket bodies have been purposefully ditched on the moon, including Apollos 13, 14, 15, and 17. Gray, along with astronomers who noticed this object, alerted NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The rocket body itself has been in space, lazily floating for years at this point. There is no official agency in charge of keeping track of space debris so close to the moon and so far from Earth. Gray initially stated that he believed the rocket body had been from a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket launched in 2015, but later stated he was wrong on that point. He believed it was actually from a 2014 Chinese lunar mission. For their part, China has absolutely denied that the rocket body belonged to them. They claim that the rocket body that everyone thinks collided with the moon actually burned up in Earth's atmosphere upon re-entry. No one wants to claim the first piece of space junk that unintentionally hit the moon. The other strange thing is the crater, or should I say craters. A standard rocket body is heavy on the engine end and lighter on the fuel end, as almost all rocket bodies will uncouple from the main craft once their fuel is spent. When these rocket bodies have hit the moon in the past, intentionally, they've left a single crater. This crater is an overlapping double. In the realm of space debris that causes impact craters, a double impact is kind of unheard of. The two craters, side by side, measure about 90 feet from end to end. This strange configuration suggests a rocket body with two heavy objects on either end of the fuel. This is strange because nothing else should be there, except maybe the main body of the craft. In some circles, this has been tied into a kind of lost cosmonaut theory, which we will probably have to get into in another episode. But there is a theory that it wasn't just a discarded rocket body that crashed into the moon, but a fully manned space mission that lost contact with Earth. This, of course, is unproven and definitely unlikely, but until scientists and astronomers can get a closer look at the crash sites,
it remains a valid theory. In fact, all theories at this moment are valid. It could have been something extraterrestrial, or perhaps a top-secret rocket booster. If it was a top-secret project, it would make sense that no one wants to claim ownership. Until more photos and analysis happens, we're left to wonder just what is going on up there on the moon's surface. July 6th, 2022. An explosion rocks Elbert County, Georgia. Initially, witnesses who heard the explosion thought it was an overdue firework, since it was just 2 days after the July 4th holiday. Upon investigation, it was found that the Georgia Guidestones, a tourist trap monument placed in 1980, had suffered what appeared to be a coordinated attack. An explosive had torn the monument apart. Why target a kitschy tourist attraction? Well, to some, this tourist attraction may be one of the most dangerous art installations in the country. Often referred to as the American Stonehenge, the Georgia Guidestones were made up of 6 giant granite slabs, weighing in at 237,746 pounds and standing at 19 feet tall. Envisioned by a man calling himself Robert Christian in 1979, he paid the Elberton Granite Finishing Company over $100,000 to build and erect the monument on farmland he had purchased. Where people get upset about the stones isn't what they look like or how they functioned. When I say functioned, I mean the Georgia Guidestones were a working astronomical clock, with holes and slots drilled to look at the North Star and angle a sunbeam to highlight the exact day of the year. The inscriptions on the stones themselves are what made some people believe the Guidestones were more than they appeared. They read as follows: Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Unite humanity with a living new language. Rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. Avoid petty laws and useless officials. Balance personal rights with social duties. Prize truth, beauty, love, seeking harmony with the infinite. Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. For many, this appears to be a general and vague set of guidelines for an opportunistic future. Simple common-sense rules written in English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, traditional Chinese, and Russian. But to some, these Guidestones were a monument to evil. There was very little fuss about the stones at their initial unveiling in 1980. It would take time before these chunks of granite became a scapegoat for the ills of the world. Some believe that the instructions on the stones are the 10 Commandments of the Antichrist. Others still believe that the stones are some sort of lightning rod used to channel evil. Others think that the unique astronomical clock details added to the stones are signs of some sort of sun-worshipping cult. They've been implicated in everything from QAnon conspiracies to alien mysticism. To hear it told, they're the cause of all the world's problems. Conspiracy theorists and even politicians have requested that the Guidestones be torn down, reduced to rubble, and forgotten. It is pertinent to note that of all of these accusations made about the Georgia Guidestones, none have been presented with any proof. They're just theories. It seems as though when rational channels were exhausted, some strange soul turned to an act of malice to get what they wanted. The stones still left standing after July 6th were pulled down for safety reasons, and the Georgia Guidestones as they were ceased to exist. Amid the cheers of the Guidestones critics, groups are already forming to build a better, and hopefully bomb-proof, version of the Guidestones. If one thing was actually accomplished through the destruction of the Guidestones, it was giving the people the ability to rebuild it better, unburdened by certain rumors about the identity of the original planner of the stones. Some theories say it was planned and paid for by local eugenics and racism fan Herbert Kirsten. If that is the case, then this is the perfect excuse to rebuild it without the baggage of Mr. Kirsten. We talk about a lot of things on this show. We plumb some deep depths and explore the darker sides of the human experience. Today, I don't want to do that. Today, I want to talk about glitter. What even is glitter? Think about all the things around you. Think about their sparkly shine. From credit cards to confections, helmets to hospital beds, glitter is everywhere. In 2018, in a piece for the New York Times, reporter Katie Weaver entered the secretive world of glitter to try and find out where it's coming from and what it's being used for. The results were surprising. First of all, almost all of the glitter in the world is made by two companies, both located in New Jersey. One company refused to talk with Weaver, and the other agreed begrudgingly. The most troubling part of the whole piece was how the company representative reacted when asked who was the largest consumer of glitter. She refused to answer. In a world ever connected by the internet, cell phones, and the odd homing pigeon, it's odd to not know something as simple as who uses the most glitter. The company rep explained that the largest consumer of glitter absolutely does not want anyone to know that they're using it. It's such a tantalizing tease about glitter use. On the internet, wheels were already spinning. Theories were popping up all over the place. Some thought it may be the adult entertainment industry, while others were convinced it was the toothpaste manufacturers of the world, adding that bit of extra sparkle. It's been 2 years since the New York Times piece, and we're not any closer to really knowing who is using all the glitter. One theory posited that the world is running out of sand, and glitter is taking up the mantle of stuff that gets everywhere when you interact with it. In 2019, podcast Endless Thread allegedly figured it out. Through painstaking research and talking with different glitter consumers, they came to the conclusion that the world's largest glitter consumer is the paint industry. More specifically, the boat paint industry. Now, I'm not saying their research wasn't done thoroughly and completely, but why would the boat paint industry care whether or not people knew that they used the most glitter? You can look at a boat and see the glitter in the paint. It doesn't add up. The company rep that Weaver spoke to said that the largest consumer of glitter absolutely did not want anyone to know they were using glitter. It's fairly obvious that boat paint is chock full of glitter. One theory that stands out in its believability involves explosives. To understand that, you have to understand microtaggants. Microtaggants are microscopically small tags. They can be added to everything from plastics to powders and provide an almost invisible, yet easily identifiable marking. They're most commonly used in explosives. When an explosion goes off and the culprit can't be found, residue from the blast can be checked for microtaggants and cross-referenced with the supplying company's unique blend. No company would want you to know that glitter is used for this purpose. At the end of the day, with all of the mysterious things happening in the world, the identity of the world's largest glitter consumer is a simple, safe mystery that you can mull over till your heart's content. February 15th, 2002. Just outside of Lafayette, Georgia, in the community of Noble, a woman is engaging in a perfectly normal task, walking her dog. She would come across a gleaming white stone next to her path. Upon closer inspection, she realized she had found a human skull. The police were contacted and checked the area, which belonged to the Tri-State Crematorium, a crematorium serving funeral homes in Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama. When police arrived, they would discover a scene straight out of a horror movie, something that would shock the small community of Noble, rippling out to affect hundreds, if not thousands, of families. When law enforcement converged on the property, they discovered bodies, lots of bodies. Bodies stored in outbuildings, bodies laying out in the sun. Rusted coffins containing bodies were found stored all over the 16-acre property. It was shocking. The owner and operator of the crematorium, 28-year-old Brent Marsh, was arrested on a spate of charges, including abusing a corpse and burial service-related fraud. With Marsh behind bars, the monumental task of finding out just what happened at the Tri-State Crematorium could begin. Marsh, for his part, remained mostly silent on the state of the crematorium. He explained that the cremation oven was broken, and he had become backlogged. This still didn't explain the sheer number of bodies. A portable morgue was erected on the grounds, and professionals were brought in to identify bodies. A separate team was brought in to check the cremation oven, or retort, and found it to be in working order, though some faults were found. All who investigated the crematorium came to the same conclusion. It would have been simply easier to cremate the bodies rather than store them on the property. After investigation, 336 bodies in total were found on the Tri-State property. Thousands of family members of the deceased were aghast. They believed they had urns containing their loved ones, but testing revealed that they actually had cement dust, which Marsh had been giving out in lieu of actual cremains. There were still questions surrounding this horrific dereliction of duty, including foremost, why? Why had Brent Marsh failed so spectacularly in his duties? Those looking for answers found none. When Marsh pled guilty, he made a short statement, which I'll quote here. Quote, "To those of you who may have come here today looking for answers, I cannot give you." End quote. Marsh was brought up on 787 counts, including desecration of a corpse and burial service fraud. Charges like these could have gotten him life in prison, but as part of a plea deal, he was sentenced to just 12 years. Over 1,700 family members of the deceased would later form different class action suits against Marsh and the funeral homes who used him for cremation services. They would receive judgments in the millions. As part of the settlement agreement, the Tri-State Crematorium and all of its outbuildings were razed to the ground. 20 years on, some questions still remain. Initial reporting stated that some of the bodies found were over 10 years old, which didn't make sense as Brent had taken over operations at Tri-State in 1996 from his father. If some of the bodies were over 10 years old, that would mean that Brent's father had also been storing bodies instead of properly cremating them. As the story progressed, mention of the older bodies disappeared. To this day, Brent Marsh remains the only person charged in connection with the improperly stored bodies at Tri-State Crematorium. In 2006, lawyers for Marsh put out a statement that a physiological examination found that Brent and his father were both suffering from acute mercury toxicity. They surmised that improper ventilation meant that Marsh and his father had been exposed to toxic levels of mercury stemming from the burning of mercury amalgam tooth fillings present in the deceased. Mercury exposure can cause personality changes, and in some extreme cases, psychosis. Was Brent even in his right mind when he was handing out cement dust instead of cremains? At the point this information came out, he was already serving his sentence. Brent Marsh was released from prison in 2016 after serving his entire sentence. He will be on probation the rest of his life. One of the conditions of his release is that he can never work with bodies again. I think that's for the best.
August 16th, 2010, London. Gareth Williams is a mathematician working for SIS, the Secret Intelligence Service in the UK, better known as MI6. He's staying at a safe house in London, working on a project that was reported to have involved the US National Security Agency, or NSA, in tracking money laundering by the Russian mob. On August 23rd, co-workers of Williams were beginning to get concerned. They hadn't heard from him in days. Police conducted a welfare check on the flat where he was staying, and what they found is widely considered to be one of the UK's most mysterious unsolved mysteries. In the flat, in the bathtub, there was a duffel bag. A red North Face brand duffel bag, to be exact. It was padlocked shut from the inside, and when police forced the bag open, they found Gareth Williams. He was naked,
curled up in the bag and had been decomposing for days. Investigation would place the time of death somewhere around the 16th of August. If finding Williams's body in the bag wasn't strange enough, the investigation around the flat became even stranger. First and foremost, there was a padlock on the bag, so where was the key? Well, it was finally found inside the bag, underneath Williams's body. A check of the surrounding room found that if Williams had placed himself in the bag, then he did it without touching the tub, as there were no fingerprints present. Possible, but difficult. There were also no fingerprints on the padlock, so at this point, Williams would have had to climb into the bag and lock it from the outside, without ever touching it. Something wasn't adding up. After an autopsy on Williams's body, it was found that there was no sign of injury or scuffle, and his system contained no alcohol, drugs, or poisons. The flat itself showed no signs of forced entry. Interestingly, a search of Williams's internet history showed a few visits to different bondage sites, and 3 years prior, Williams had to be freed from his bedposts after tying himself up and finding himself unable to escape. Also present in the flat were over 20,000 British pounds worth of women's clothing. Was someone else staying in the flat? Let's break down the most popular theories. Theory 1. Williams put himself in the bag. 2 experts were brought in to test this theory, and after 400 attempts concluded that it was highly unlikely that Williams would have been able to lock the bag after getting in. One of the experts, William McKay, would go on to say that it was possible. Theory number 2. Someone put him in the bag. With the women's clothing and no sign of forced entry, it would appear that someone else was in the flat. Partial DNA found in the flat would lead investigators to a Mediterranean couple that they would seek for questioning, only to later find out the DNA evidence was contaminated by one of the forensic professionals investigating the case. Theory number 3. This was all done by the Russians. In 2015, a Russian defector outlined what had happened to Williams. Boris Karpichkov, a former KGB agent, stated that the agency had killed Williams after he refused to turn double agent. He explained that Williams was killed with an untraceable poison inserted into his ear. These statements are uncorroborated and unproven. The official coroner's inquest found that Gareth Williams' death was, quote, unnatural and likely to have been criminally mediated, end quote. The heater was left on in the flat, and the heat advanced decomposition to the point that a surprising amount of evidence had already degraded by the time the body was found. In 2021, it was announced that the investigation into Williams' death would be re-examined. I'll let you all know how that goes.
Many believe 1897 to be the year the collective consciousness was introduced to vampires. Irish writer Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula, would introduce us to the suave yet serious count of the same name. Vampires burst onto the gothic horror scene as well-dressed, charismatic rogues. By the end of Dracula, you understand why Dracula has to die, but can't help but feel a bit bad for him. Since 1897, the image of the vampire in popular culture hasn't changed too terribly much. They're suave, debonair, devil-may-care types, as likely to mesmerize with their charming good looks as they are to drain you of your blood completely. Bram Stoker did not invent the vampire. The vampires that came before Dracula were of a different sort. Beastly, dangerous things, which terrorized villages and struck fear into the hearts of the people of the Middle Ages. A recent excavation in Poland is just one example of the lengths people would go to rid their lives of the vampire. 2022. A team from Nicholas Copernicus University, during an excavation of a grave site in Pien, outside of Krakow, Poland, discovered a strange grave. It was a woman's skeleton, wearing a gold-threaded cap, with a sickle laid across her throat. There was also a padlock around her left big toe. These burial rituals are not unheard of,
but this is the most recent case of a vampire burial. Myths and legends about blood-sucking fiends were not uncommon in 17th century Poland. In fact, many historians believe that Poland suffered a kind of vampire epidemic around that time. Polish vampires, as I stated before, are nothing like the pop culture, cape-wearing sex symbols of modern literature and film. They did not sparkle in the sunlight, and they certainly didn't care about random Victorian women. As Slavic folklore expert Kazimierz Morzynski put it in the 1930s, quote, "Whatever the Slavs claim about these half-demonic creatures, it is filled with unbound savagery." I explain all of this so you know just how scary the concept of a Polish or Slavic vampire is. The Slavic vampire myth was so radically different from what we are used to that it almost seems completely unrelated. Bodies inhabited by their restless ghosts rise from the grave and return to their family home to viciously maul and eat their closest family members. There is no theatricality, no round-rimmed sunglasses, and definitely nothing sexy about this. Anyone could become a vampire, but a few signs were an almost guarantee that you'd get a vampire burial. If you had teeth at birth, you were a vampire. If you had 2 sets of teeth, vampire. Unibrow, that's a vampire. In those times, any physical deformity could mark you as a future member of the undead. Bodies were treated roughly after death to prevent them coming back as one of the undead or upiersh. Practices like smashing the deceased head in with a rock or removing their arms, legs, and head. Other bodies were buried face down, their jaws forced open to bite into the dirt. At least one other recorded vampire burial site had multiple instances of a scythe being buried over the dead's throat. The thinking was, if the body decided to suddenly sit up, the scythe would quickly decapitate them, stopping the problem before it even started. The padlock on the big toe, many believe, symbolizes the completion of the cycle and locks the dead from coming back now that their cycle is done. So what could have compelled the people who interred this body to assume they were dealing with an honest-to-goodness upiersh? It actually appears as though the skeletal remains answer that question. In this picture, notice the protruding front tooth. That may have been all it took to designate this woman all through her life as a future member of the undead. There is a lot to be said about how people with deformities were treated in the eras leading up to today. And this is just one example of the intolerance they faced in life and maybe even in death. August 6th, 1945, Hiroshima, Japan. The world is introduced to the pure destructive power of the atom bomb, a nuclear weapon capable of leveling an entire city. Whether known or unknown, this act will ripple outwards in ways we could never imagine. It would end a world war, but kick off a Cold War. Nuclear weapons remain, to this day, a constant concern in every country in the world. So what would happen if one got lost on American soil? A lost nuclear weapon is sadly not unheard of. The United States military even has a term for it. A broken arrow incident covers a small list of accidental events involving nuclear weapons. Among the list, entries include burning of a nuclear weapon, accidental detonation of a nuclear weapon, and radioactive contamination. There is a very concerning entry at the end: loss in transit of nuclear asset with or without its carrying vehicle. February 5th, 1958, in the air above Wassaw Sound on the coast of Georgia. Air Force Colonel Howard Richardson is returning in a B-47 Stratojet from a simulated bombing in Virginia. He's carrying a 7,000-pound Mark 15 thermonuclear bomb. Meanwhile, an F-86 fighter jet on its own training mission, flown by Lieutenant Clarence Stewart, is oblivious to Richardson's flight, and not seeing it on his radar, descends from his current altitude and smashes into Colonel Richardson's plane. The impact shears one of the wings from Stewart's F-86 and severely damages the fuel tanks on Richardson's B-47 bomber. Stewart ejects from his plane and ends up in a swamp, shaken but alive. Richardson and command at Hunter Air Force Base have a decision to make. The runway at Hunter AFB is under repair, meaning that if Richardson can land, it will be on a runway far shorter than what would be considered safe. There is a concern that the bomb, loosened in its moorings, may break free of the plane and detonate. After 3 passes over Hunter AFB, the decision is made. Richardson will ditch the bomb in Wausau Sound. The bomb he has ditched becomes the first Broken Arrow incident where a complete bomb is not recovered in U.S. history. On February 6th, the search for the bomb, now being referred to as the Tybee bomb due to the reported location of the bomb being near Tybee Island in Wausau Sound, begins. Ships are dispatched to the area, and divers with handheld sonar are sent down into the murky waters. On April 16, 1958, a letter from the Office of the Secretary of Defense to Carl Durham, the chairman of the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy, confirms the worst. Quote, "The search for one redacted weapon jettisoned from an aircraft on February 5, 1958, was discontinued on April 16, 1958, and the weapon is considered irretrievably lost." End quote. One big point of contention was whether or not the bomb on board the B-47 contained a capsule. The capsule is the part of the bomb used to initiate a nuclear explosion. The Air Force maintains that the bomb on Richardson's B-47 had a dummy capsule incapable of actually detonating. This is countered by a 1966 letter from the Assistant Secretary of Defense W.J. Howard that stated the Mark 15 dropped off Tybee Island was, quote, "a complete weapon, a bomb with a nuclear capsule," end quote. The area is constantly studied for undue levels of radiation. So far, nothing has been found to indicate any kind of radioactive leak in the area surrounding Tybee Island. The official stance of the Air Force is that the Mark 15 dropped in 1958 is best left undisturbed, buried in 5 to 15 feet of silt, until the end of time. The 21st century was in full swing by November of 2000, and that was no more apparent than on the World Wide Web. Previously a novelty, society was coming around to the idea that the internet was on track to become an inescapable part of our daily life. People from all walks of life who may have never interacted were now able to talk and work with each other in ways never thought possible. It might have even been possible to talk to someone from the future. On November 2nd, 2000, a user known as Time Travel Zero, or John Titor, began posting on the Coast to Coast and Time Travel forums. He exploded onto the scene, claiming to be a military time traveler from the year 2036. He would go on to explain that he was in the year 2000 on a personal stopover before heading to 1975. He was going to 1975 to collect an IBM 5100 computer to fix legacy system errors caused by a virus in 2036. He was very forthcoming with the ins and outs of time travel, explaining in detail the components that went into building a time machine. In true time traveler fashion, this time machine was housed in either a 1966 Corvette or a 1987 Chevy Suburban. Outside of posts about who he was and how his time machine worked, Titor was happy to tell people about the future that awaited them. He was always quick to add a disclaimer that alternate timelines existed, and that his foretelling of events may never happen in our timeline. Titor's time on the internet only lasted about 4 months, but in that time he built a faithful following, hanging on to his every word. What follows is a brief list of events John Titor foretold. A civil war over order and rights would kick off in 2005 before becoming a full-blown crisis by 2008. This civil war would split the US into 5 different regions with different goals. The Civil War would end with a short nuclear World War III. At the conclusion of the bombs dropping, Omaha, Nebraska would become the new capital of the US. Now in 2022, these events obviously never happened. This has not detracted fans of Titor, who claim that by telling people that these events would happen, because of the many worlds theory, a new timeline was formed by Titor. It's a very complicated way to explain away why these events never happened. The enduring legacy of Titor is probably due to the perfect time which he was active. Nowadays, it's hard to remain completely anonymous on the internet. Today, John Titor would have been dragged on Twitter within 5 minutes of claiming to be a time traveler. In 2000, it was a completely different story. Titor still stays in the cultural consciousness because no one ever took credit for him. There was no grand reveal of the puppet master pulling the strings on the John Titor project. Attempts to find him have been strangely fruitless. The closest thing to a break in the case came in 2008, when a private investigator hired by an Italian TV show found the John Titor Foundation, a for-profit organization started in 2003. A search of their company contacts returned a post office box in Kissimmee, Florida. An IP address connected to Titor also returned a result in Kissimmee. In February 2009, a report by a self-proclaimed hoax hunter allegedly blew the lid off of the John Titor case. It was found that in the original thread where Titor answered questions, over 80 of the people replying were allegedly found to be likely creations of the person or people running the John Titor account. The reasoning behind this is that those accounts outside of John Titor's thread never posted about him again. They seem to exist solely in the John Titor bubble, never venturing out into the internet at large. Hundreds of thousands of words have been written about Titor, and while I can confidently say that some of the cases I look at will never be solved, I'm not so sure about Titor. This all happened just 22 years ago. There is still time for whoever created Titor, or Titor himself, to show up and throw back the curtain.